Hello, everyone. I hope you've had a great month. I'm glad that you're able to join me this morning, and we can have a conversation about vulnerability and strength. Um, I guess I'd like to start with a little story, and it really has to do with why I'm really holding these talks or whatever you want to call them, discourses. It really has to do with I was asking myself last time as I was preparing for the course, why self-mastery? Why is this so important? Why am I feel like I have to impart whatever this knowledge is that I've collected? And really the situation that I shared with you in the brief description that I went through this past, actually, 5 or 6 months with my friend, is a really good reason why self-mastery is important. Because there's a great poem by Rudyard Kipling called "If," and the first stanza is, "If you can keep your head about you, or if the word in the middle of life, if you can keep your head about you while all those around you are losing theirs and blaming it on you." And it's not like anyone was blaming me or I had any kind of situation where I was being accused of when I was helping Dave, but it most certainly had its level of stress, and you have that parental awareness going on all the time, and it most certainly helped that I was able to keep a stillness in here, that no matter how crazy things got out here, I was able to be present and witness and experience and hear everything that needed to be felt through that moment. And so, the story I'm going to tell you has to do actually with this T-shirt I'm wearing. And I buy like T-shirts in bulk. I'll buy like 20, 25 at a time, and they'll always have like little dumb sayings on them or whatever. There's a great website called $6 T-shirts that I get a lot of them from, and this one happened to come from it there as well. But it was really just completing an order. When I ordered it, I thought, that's sort of cool. It's a tarot card. Why not? And when Dave and I were getting ready to go for the, for sure diagnosis of his pancreatic cancer, we had been to the oncologist once before. I saw how gloomy it was, and I went ahead and thought, well, I'll wear this shirt because it'll help me remember to be strong, and hopefully maybe someone else who's seeing it and some other caretaker, it might be a reminder of them. But as I wore the shirt and looked at it, I started to become aware of really what is on the shirt, right? I started to become aware of what's really happening on the shirt. And I'm going to bring up an image here. Let me see if I can get it up for you guys. That's not going to do it. There we go. This is really the image. This is the tarot card from the Rider deck. And if you really look at it, this is the card for strength. Do you see anything of strength like what we normally see it as, right? What you really see is a feminine person manhandling a lion. I don't know if I'd call it manhandling, but what you see is this really, almost everything I've been teaching for the last decade or more is about the nurturing method, and how the nurturing method is really about strength. If you really understand what the nurturing method is, it's encapsulated in this card, because this card really represents, to me, the kind of strength that we were taught as children was like, be strong and collect your feelings, and don't basically, if we were overexcited or if we were over sad or we were wanting to express our feelings, we were told to collect ourselves, and we were discouraged from feeling our feelings. But when I look at this card, I see that really it's through this nurturing tenderness that this woman is able to handle this this lion. And of course, the lion is the representative of the beast within ourselves. If you look at the woman and the affinity above her head, of course, it signals divinity. So it's as if the higher self is really mastering the lower self. And so when I really saw this and I started to break it down, I went, this is why you've seen this image in my background several times, because I see it as a real representation of what I teach. And so, you know, it's interesting because as I sort of fixed on this symbology, there was times when things were, of course, overwhelming and difficult, and you know, it was this kind of thing of being able to have these anchors and be able to sort of use them when maybe I couldn't pull myself together as well as I'd like. So, and if you really look at what's going on in this card too, there's a lot of vulnerability happening in that card. I mean, she doesn't have any protection, she doesn't have any armor on, she doesn't have a weapon on, and yet this vulnerability is really what strength is about. And it's what we're going to talk about today. It's what we're really going to get into. We're going to talk about the power of being wrong and all that kind of good stuff. So, you know, being wrong is like, I don't know, it almost seems as if, you know, people have a real difficulty with admitting they're wrong. I recently worked with a cat who, I mean, he was a nice enough guy, but he just really could not admit he was wrong. You know, we had a situation in where it was obvious he was wrong. There were several people saying he was wrong, but yet he never could say he was wrong. You know, and he'd say, Matt, why do I have to go back and visit the past when I would try to bring it up? And that was his way out of, let's say, maintaining the denial that he could be wrong. And mind you, you know, we have a lot of evolutionary reasons why, well, we have a big one why being wrong is you know, why we have such negative feelings around being wrong. You know, and the biggest one, of course, is, you know, throughout the how many hundreds of thousands of years it took us to evolve, being wrong meant the end. Oftentimes, being wrong meant the end of your time on Earth and the end of your line. And so, being wrong, you know, it could have some serious consequences from that standpoint. As well, there's a certain amount of shame involved in being wrong, right? Oftentimes, when we're wrong, we have this idea that, you know, it's like just because we were wrong, you know, our presence is wrong. And that's not necessarily, you know, we are what we are, we're not what we do, and we make mistakes, but sometimes it's hard to separate those things. And what will happen is, of course, again, from an evolutionary standpoint or from a development standpoint, if you are in a village and you did something wrong and you were exiled, that was a death sentence. You really could not survive without having some form of support from other people. And so the very idea that you could be, because of a decision you make or something you do, you could be exiled, also had some serious consequences. You know, we're not really living in that world anymore. You really live in a world where you may not be living in it by yourself, but there is an awful lot of loneliness, and there is an awful lot of separation. And I find that probably being wrong accounts for a large amount of it. And, you know, when we can't admit we're wrong, it shows a part of our I want to say, our inability to be able to be mature about certain situations. And so, if you think about it, the cognitive biases that we find ourselves, I mean, I don't know how many are listed here. It's fine print, and I know of a couple hundred at least of cognitive biases that we have. A couple hundred cognitive biases. Think about that. How many can you name? How many biases could you identify for yourself? How aware are you of the faults in your mind, or let's say the errors that could occur? And, you know, confirmation bias is a great example. A lot of us have heard of confirmation bias, and we most certainly know what it is. We all have that family member or close friend who, no matter what the story may be, they're always looking for the story that fits their narrative. They're only looking at the articles and the information that supports their belief, and denying or refusing or not even looking at the articles that would refute their belief. And so this is confirmation bias. And I mean, we're all subject to it. So if we have all these biases that we have out there, how could we really be expected to be right? And this is really important, because I think that if you have a standard for yourself that means that you have to be right all the time, you really don't get a good idea of what is, you don't have the opportunity to learn from those lessons, because your ego is stuck in the sting of, whatever feeling you may have around being wrong, whether it be shame or disappointment or whatever it might be. Because you're stuck in that feeling, it makes it very difficult to be able to really learn from when you're wrong. So there's a great guy, I don't know if you're familiar with Derek Sivers or not, but Derek is he's a musician, and he had an independent website back in the early 2000s, and for his CDs, and he started putting his friends' CDs, and then he sold it for a lot of money. And he, at that point, he basically had the success he was looking for. And he then started creating these awesome videos, and I'm gonna try to pull one up here for you, and we'll try to get it going here. Let's see here. Let's see if we can make this work. Oop. Bear with me here. There we go.
Hi, this is Derek Sivers from Sivers.org, and this is Why You Need to Fail. I'm often invited to speak at conferences full of famous, successful people. They're all leaders of some sort. People look up to them. They're acclaimed and accomplished. They have a great reputation. Their struggling years of failure are behind them. And that's the problem. When you're green, you grow. When you're ripe, you rot. If you're not failing, you're not learning. So let's take a lesson from this and talk about 3 big reasons why you need to fail. First, if you're not failing, you're not learning. You know, the way you build muscle in a gym is you do something a little out of your capability so that the tiny little muscle fibers actually tear. Then, as they repair themselves, they rebuild a little stronger and a little bigger to adapt. That's why they say no pain, no gain, and it's the same with the brain. Look at these 2 sets of words for a few seconds. The second set is intentionally missing a letter in each word. So take 10 seconds to read both sides, okay? So tests show that when quizzed afterwards, people remembered 3 times as many words from the second column, the one that was missing letters. It's like when you saw the words with the blank spaces, you struggled with it for just a second, then you figured it out. But that 1 second of struggle made all the difference. To learn something effectively, you must make mistakes and pay attention to those mistakes. So let's look at a similar test. Everyone was given a paper with some facts. Group A studied the paper for 4 separate sessions. Group B studied only once, but then was tested 3 times and shown their mistakes after each test. A week later, both groups were tested, brought back and tested again. Group B scored 50% higher than Group A. That means that they had studied 1/4 as much, but learned far more. So making mistakes, being in over your head and failing, this is proven to teach better than lots of advanced preparation. This is not just for memorizing, but for anything. Practicing music, for example. I went to Berklee College of Music, and our music teacher taught us that if what we're doing in the practice room sounds good, then it's not practice. Now I get what he meant. So some students would just play what they know, start to finish. If I was in the practice room, sometimes I could hear the student in the next room just playing everything start to finish perfectly. But then one time I was in the practice room next to one of the best musicians in school, and I was surprised to hear that everything coming out of his practice room just sounded like short phrases that making lots of mistakes each time, like so lots of mistakes focusing on tiny little phrases. So doing what you know is fun, but it doesn't improve you. The most effective way to improve at anything is to find what you're not good at, to find the painful, the difficult activities that will make you better, then do those things over and over again until you've got it. If you're interested in this, there are 2 great books about it. The Talent Code by Daniel Coyle, and Talent is Overrated by Jeff Colvin. So, Michael Jordan, basketball legend, your turn.
I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over and over again in my life. And that is why I succeed.
Okay, so reason number 1 why you need to fail is because if you're not failing, you're not learning. But it would be a shame for you to think these are just little academic experiments like, okay, I'll remember that next time I need to memorize word pairs. So instead, try to extrapolate this to your real life. Deliberate practice to improve skill is a fact. It's a neurological reality. So knowing that, how would you apply this to your life? If you just keep doing what you're good at, you're coasting, you've plateaued. You need to make a real effort to fail more. But a voice inside you is probably saying, failure is not an option. You're the top in your field. You can't throw away a career of hard work. You have a reputation to protect. You have an image to uphold. You have an impeccable track record. People would lose respect for you, right? Well, let's look at a very big deal. Fixed mindset versus growth mindset. People with a fixed mindset think that talent comes from an ingrained level of ability. They think, I'm good at this, or I'm not good at this. They see it as fixed, that you either are or you aren't. Some people are born artists, some people are born leaders, some people are just good with numbers and some aren't. People with a growth mindset think that with hard work, anyone can master anything. They think, I got it because I worked hard at it. They see the starting point as moot. It doesn't matter if someone took to a skill a little more naturally at a young age. Absolutely anyone can catch up and surpass the so-called naturals. So 2 big reasons why this matters. Number 1, the fixed mindset hurts you. There was a 2-part test given to a bunch of students. The first part was intentionally easy, and the second part was impossibly hard. So it created a situation of initial encouragement, then certain failure. After each person failed the test, they were asked what they planned to do before the next test. Those with a growth mindset said they would study harder for the next test. Those with a fixed mindset said they would study less for the next test. After all, this is something they're obviously just not good at, so why waste their time? So reason number 2 why this matters, parents pay attention here, is where this mindset comes from. If a child is told well-meaning things like, you're so smart, you're a brilliant child, you're so great at this, you have always been a math whiz, then it forms the fixed mindset view of the world. But instead of praising the person, if they're praised on their effort, like telling them, you must have worked really hard, or let's look at how to improve that, then that forms a growth mindset view of the world. So what's fascinating is that it can be changed in an instant. So remember this 2-part test, right? So it starts very easy and gets impossibly hard. Now, they did an experiment to see how a simple 6-word comment would affect their score if somebody were to take this test twice, a 6-word comment given to them after the first time. So randomly, half were praised for their effort. They were told, you must have worked really hard. The other half was praised for their intelligence. You must be smart at this. That was it, just a 6-word comment after the first test before the second. Those that were praised for their effort improved their initial score by 30% when taking it the next time. But those that were praised for their intelligence had their score decline by 20% in the second test, all because of 6 short words. So to me, this is a huge point. People with a fixed mindset who think, I'm I am good at this. I'm just good at this. They collapse in the face of failure. If you're interested in this, please read Carol Dweck's great book called Mindset and Josh Waitzkin's book called The Art of Learning. So why is this so important for my successful audiences? It's because they're constantly being praised for being brilliant. Once somebody is successful, everyone starts to tell them, oh, you're a genius filmmaker, or you're a natural artist. Even if you didn't used to believe that stuff, it's hard not to when you're being praised every day. So no wonder they don't want to fail. It would threaten not just their self-image, but the fixed perception of their fans. People like to think of their heroes as geniuses and infallible, right? So speaking of, let's watch Picasso paint. This is a documentary that was made by a friend of his that got to capture his process while he was painting. So he was in the studio with Picasso, capturing the moment after every major change to the photo. So now watch the legs. This is a bullfighter. Look at the legs on the bullfighter on the left side. One leg down, one leg up. Now the top leg just went up. He's going to paint over that with the cape. Paint the cape red. Hide all evidence that it used to have both legs going down. Now on the right-hand side, look at his two hands. The one hand on the sword is open, and the hand facing forward is closed. Changes his mind, the hand on the sword closes, the hand facing forward opens. Now watch the legs in green. He's going to change his mind. The top leg is going to go down. Oh, actually, I love this. The bull's head. Imagine he's looking at this going, hey man, I'm Picasso. I can do better than that. So, okay, now look at the legs are going down. He's going to cover that up with the cape. Now, I think that watching this process and the mistakes is a lot more encouraging than just seeing a finished product. This is why you should never compare your inside to someone else's outside. We see all the mistakes in ourselves, but we only see others' final product. But if more of us would show the world our mistakes and our sweaty working process, we'd actually be doing everyone a big favor. So, the fixed mindset versus growth mindset makes all the difference in the world. Now, the third reason why you need to fail is for experiments. This is the quantity. Here's what I mean. In music school, I took singing lessons. I had this great teacher where I would bring in a song and he'd say, okay, sing it to me the way you wrote it. So I would sing it, start to finish. Radio and TV shows taught her everything she knows. So I'd sing the whole song like that. And he'd say, all right, now do it up an octave. I'd say, up an octave? What do you mean? I can't sing that high. He'd say, I don't care. Go. Do it. I'd say, radio and TV shows taught her everything she knows. It sounded terrible. But by the end of 3 minutes of doing that, I'll admit that I tried some things that I wouldn't have tried otherwise. It gives you a new perspective on what you're doing. Then he'd say, okay, now do it down an octave. I'd say, but I can't sing that low. He'd say, I don't care. Try. Go. I'd say, radio and TV shows taught her everything she knows. Then he'd say, okay, now do it double speed. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Radio and TV shows taught her everything she knows. All of a sudden, I had to focus on my enunciation and phrasing. Then he'd say, okay, now do it half speed. 1, 2, 3, 4. And all of a sudden, when you're singing a song half speed, you have to really focus on where you take your breaths, and you find all these kind of nuances of space between the words and how you can use that. So then he'd even have me do some other things, like, okay, now sing it to me like Tom Waits would. Now sing it like you're Mick Jagger. That's it. Stand up, prance around the room like Mick Jagger. Do it right. Come on. So he'd run me through all these experiments. When it was all done, he'd say, okay, now how did the first original go again? And I'll admit that after trying all these different ways, it made me realize that the first thing I did was just yet another experiment. It was an awesome reminder that everything we do is just one option. Everything is an experiment. So the question for you is, which one of these versions was a failure? None, obviously, right? It's a silly question. There is no such thing as failure if everything is just an experiment. So one last story to tie this all together. A ceramics teacher announced on opening day that he was dividing the class into 2 groups. Everyone on the left side only needed to make 1 pot all semester, and that 1 pot would be graded on its perfection. Everyone on the right side would be graded only by weight. He said, I don't care what you make. On the final day, I'm going to bring in my bathroom scale and we're just going to weigh it. Over 50 pounds of pots gets you an A, over 40 pounds gets you a B, 30 pounds a C, etc. I don't even care what it is. I'm not even going to look at it. Just weigh it. Go. So, at the end of the semester, there was a surprising result. The works of the highest quality, when an outside observer was watching at the end of the class, were all the ones that were made by the quantity group, those that were being judged only on weight. So it seems that while this quantity group was busy just churning out piles of work and learning from their mistakes, the quality group, had the one that was being judged just on one pot, had sat there theorizing about perfection, and in the end had nothing but grandiose theories and one mediocre pot. So we all have these perfectionist tendencies. So making mistakes and failing is a great way to break that paralysis. And in the end, apparently, it makes better work anyway. So, the 3 big reasons why you need to fail. Number 1, it's required for learning. Number 2, it keeps you in the growth mindset. And number 3, it reminds you that everything is just an experiment. In musical terms, instead of thinking classical music, think jazz, where there's this great saying, if you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough. And lastly, it's a lot more fun. My name's Derek Sivers. I hope this was enjoyable. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Alrighty. So, Derek did a great job of explaining why being wrong or making mistakes helps you. I think it goes further than that. I think that it's interesting to see what happens when you're willing to be wrong and the effect it has on the people around you and their willingness and comfort levels of being wrong as well. And in fact, this got ferreted out in a Yale group of studies they were doing on AI and how basically AI worked with, or how AI could integrate into the different things that we're doing. And so what they've done is they've taken small groups of people that were working with humanoid robots, and they basically would program. They had a control group where the robots never made any mistakes, and then they had a group where the robots would make mistakes. And the job was to lay these tracks down so that, I guess a train or something could go down the tracks. And every once in a while, the robot would make a mistake and it'd say, oh, I'm sorry, guys, robots aren't perfect either. And they found in the groups where the robots would do this, the tenor of the group became more friendly. People were more willing to make mistakes and take chances. The actual work of the group became more productive. So, in other words, a non-humanoid, I guess, robot is saying, hey, it's making a mistake and it has this effect on us. They did another one where these were basically, it was sort of like a online social kind of setting where you were assigned 2 friends, and one of the friends, unbeknownst to you, was a bot. And the bot was programmed to make mistakes every so often, and again, it would apologize or whatever it was. But again, these people had no idea that they were actually dealing with a bot. They just thought they were dealing with another human. And each one of these people would be, working with other groups as well as part of their color scheme. And so they found that when the robot would, admit it made a mistake, not only did the group, benefit, but it actually spread out into the other groups that were attached. So in other words, by admitting you're wrong, by going ahead and owning your mistake publicly, you have an effect on the people around you, and there's lots of reasons for this. And it's really where a lot of the excitement for me for being wrong and vulnerability comes into. And we're going to get into that when we get into the vulnerability here in a little bit. And the other part of being wrong is I do this a lot. I use this as a tool. I learned it actually from early on, and when I was in my early 20s, I went to go work for an entrepreneur who would hold these classes for young people, and they were inspirational and they were encouraging them, and basically he would, he was worth millions of dollars, and he had to make himself human. And so when he was, talking about the options that people would have when they got out of high school, one of the things he would say he would use the word cosmetology, but he would go cosma, and when he would do this, he would, of course, I would jump in. I wanted to be helpful. I'd say cosmetology, and he'd go, yeah, that's it. And so, this must have gone on, I don't know, a dozen times or so, and each time I was there, quick to help him out. Well, one day he and I went out to lunch together, and as he's talking, he says, girls have a lot of options, guys have a lot of options when they get out. They could do this, they could do that. They could go to cosmetology school. And he said it perfectly. And he winked as he said it. And of course, a little bit of me felt like an ass, but what I really got is that what he was doing was humanizing himself. He understood that when people would see him, and they only saw his wealth, they didn't see his faults, they didn't see his weaknesses, they didn't see the struggles that he had to get there. And so by doing this, he was actually offering them a way, a common point, because we all suffer, we're all wrong. I had another a mentor, more of a sales mentor, well-spoken guy, but anytime we would go out, we did cold calling together, and anytime we would go out, he would sort of mess up his hair a little bit, loosen his tie. And at first I was like, what's he doing? And then we would walk into a place, and of course there'd be the receptionist, and they're a little, hands-offish, and he'd go, I'm sorry to bother you. Now, mind you, he wasn't a stutterer. He'd say, I was hoping you could help me. And he would continue through this, and he would ask these questions, and it was amazing because people would just offer him the answers. In a lot of cases, the receptionist would take him directly to the person who was responsible for benefits. And of course, at that point, he would compose himself. He would show that he had mastery over the knowledge, but yet he still had this ability to not show anybody up by feeling, if they were great, he was good. If they were good, he was okay. He understood that people feel better when they're able to judge us. Unfortunately, it's true. And so when he'd walk in with his messed up hair and this loose tie, and he'd ask for help, he was putting people in a one-up position and asking them for help. And in that, he was actually able to get through gatekeepers and get a lot of customers. So he was able to use being wrong or looking wrong as a tool. And again, if we're so caught up that we can't be wrong, that we don't understand, if we have a fixed mindset and we think that being wrong is something about us, and it's going to be really hard for us to be able to not only just make progress in life, but to have worthwhile relationships. Who wants to be with anyone who can't say they're wrong, who can't admit they're wrong? I mean, ultimately, we all know that person, and we may be that person. I know I came from I come from that environment. If you knew me 25 years ago, there's no way I could say I was wrong. It was, I had a fixed mindset, and it was very difficult for me to really accept that I could be wrong. Tyrannical, so I was a tyrant in a lot of ways because of it. And even like the gentleman I spoke about before that I worked with, he's a tyrant and he doesn't even know it because he just can't be wrong. And see, the problem I think oftentimes with the idea of being wrong is really the vulnerability that is inherent in it. And this is why the two of them sort of have to go hand in hand, because if you're not willing to be vulnerable, it's going to be difficult to be wrong. And, what is vulnerability? Vulnerability is, I didn't really know how today's meeting was going to go. I didn't know what I would say or what I would do. I didn't have the time to prepare that I normally have. And so far it's gone pretty good. I haven't broken down crying or anything along those lines that I thought might happen. But I guess the thing is that I was willing to roll the dice and be here. So there's this willingness that's in vulnerability. You have to be willing to be vulnerable. And for me, I started to see the strength of being vulnerable, of course, 20 years ago when I started to change this position that I had. And one of the things I would probably, I like to think about vulnerability as intimacy, right? there's different levels of intimacy and different kinds of intimacy, and you can have intimacy with a coworker, and it doesn't mean anything physical. It just means that you've opened your heart and you've exposed part of yourself. In fact, if you break the word intimacy down into me see, into me see, I'm laying down my defenses, I'm dropping my walls, and I'm allowing you to see inside of me, right? Well, for a lot of us, maybe around the ages of 13 or 14, and our hormones started kicking off, and had an object of desire, had a person we wanted to be vulnerable with. We wanted them to see who we were, and so we went and we may have shared these feelings, or we may have done it through some form of a note or a friend or whatever, and they went, "You? No way! Ha ha!" Whatever form of rejection that happened right there, it's happened to most of us. And whether we're aware of it or not, at that moment when we did that, we said to ourselves, I'm never going to be vulnerable again first. I'm going to wait till the other person is vulnerable first, and then I'll be vulnerable. It sort of saves us from this, exposing ourselves is what we thought. And what it did is it saved us from that, but it saved us or prevented so much more from coming into our lives. That same business mentor I told you about used to have this saying about sometimes what appears strong is actually weak, and what appears weak is actually strong. And I would have to say that most of the time it is that way. There's an idea in poker to tell, it's called misrepresentation. And the idea is that when you're on a really, really big hand in poker, you're going to misrepresent, you're going to pretend like you're on a little hand, because you want people to bring the money into the pot so that you can win more. And vice versa. We all know the bluff. If you're on a little hand, we act like we're on a big hand, and that's misrepresentation. And I found that really walking through life, I can almost see someone's inside by just using that same idea of misrepresentation. So not all the time, but just a lot of times, if someone's really like strong and appears like they have it, I know really what they're feeling like on the inside. The guy that's quiet and is passive, he scares me because I know what he may be on the inside. So, this idea of vulnerability, that when I'm willing to be vulnerable first, I mean, many of you who know me, this is really how it happened. We sat down together, and I spent time with you, and we got to know each other, and there was this feeling of intimacy that occurred. And that's really the magic of that formula for me, that everyone created this idea that people have to be vulnerable first. And so when I'm vulnerable first, people open up and they're vulnerable back with me. And I have these rewarding and enriching relationships because of my willingness to be vulnerable. It is, I created, while I was working on this class, what I do is I have these whiteboards in my house, and what I'll do is I'll basically write down what I think, something may be or something may mean or whatever I'm working on. And this particular month, because of the situation with Dave, I didn't have as much time as I would like to prepare. But that's okay. You can see here in this list of, what is strength. I don't see force there. I don't see imposing my will there. I don't see, dominating others or forcing others into submission on that list, right? What is strength, right? And this is some of the stuff we'll talk about as we walk through this, but, going back to the tarot card and understanding what strength really is. I was with two young men the other day, about 6 weeks ago, and we were sitting by a fire, and they were telling me how they never smile. And they were actually telling each other this, and how they just felt like it was so tough that they never smiled. And, of course, and you could see they said it with pride. And I thought to myself, wow, what a lonely life. It's my smile that really, it's your smile that attracted me to you, and my smile that attracted you to me. And whatever, however all that works. But long story short, why wouldn't I want to be nice? Why wouldn't I want to be, accommodating and helpful and respectful? There's so many rewards that come from it. And so when we're vulnerable, we start to see this and we start to understand these things. And vulnerable has to be able to be wrong, to be able to admit that you're wrong, particularly to other people, you have to be vulnerable. Unfortunately, a lot of people are just addicted to being right. Being right is so tied into who they are, and they have such a fixed mindset that there's just nothing you're going to be able to do. And I would suggest that you just be nice and strong and move on. Don't throw pearls before swine. So I think I've covered most everything I'd like to cover in this. I would suggest that this practice period, this month, you really evaluate your belief system and where you may be wrong and your willingness to admit that you're wrong. The problem with this sort of is that I may be willing to admit that I'm wrong or think I am, but really it's like I'm only doing it out of like what I'm willing to do it. I would suggest that if you can meet someone in a space to where you can say you're wrong and watch how they react, I think you'll be quite surprised. I mean, just think about it. It's like the person, let's say that you're walking down the hallway and you got a Coke in your hand, and someone walks quickly out of their office and runs into you and they spill Coke on themselves. And then they start screaming at you. Why were you walking down the hall? Yada, 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 yada. God damn it, you got Coke all over me. I've actually had people say that to me, right? And it was their fault. Now, of course, I could have said, well, screw you, brother. You're the one that came out of your office, yada, 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 yada. And then there would have been a conflict, right? God only knows what would have happened at that point. But it definitely would have been a feel-bad moment. Instead, I went, brother, I am so sorry. I had no idea you'd be coming out of your office at this moment. I apologize. Had I known, I most certainly would never have spilled coffee on you. That was never my intent. And even though there was a little of facetiousness in there, it's taken in a much different way, right? Because, of course, at that point, he went, oh, no problem, man. It was probably my fault, too. I shouldn't have come out so quickly. And he owned his, because I was the one to say I was wrong. He owned his own part in the responsibility of it all. So there's so many situations in which if we could just say we're wrong. I mean, think about the political world. I mean, wouldn't it be great just to hear a politician once say they were wrong? It ain't gonna happen. Speaking of that, next week, or next month, we're gonna talk about attention, right? And what you're giving your attention to. In mid-September, so I deleted a lot of my, all my social media accounts other than LinkedIn. And I quit watching the news completely. I quit reading analysis. I quit reading anything. I quit engaging in that part of the world at all. The only thing I had figured out over almost 2 decades of being steeped in that crap was the only thing I knew about politicians is they lie. That's the only thing I really was positive about. And obviously this election was going to get crazy, and I knew all that. So I thought, you know what? I don't need to do any of this. I don't want to be involved in that. And obviously not being steeped in all that negativeness was a good thing. But there was this other thing that came out of it that I wasn't expecting, and it was really amazing for me. And that was the quality of my level of attention I'm able to give things, right? So we live in a world of like tons of information that's constantly screaming for our attention. And when you live in a world of this and you have only so much attention to offer, you start to become attention deficit. And So this is really what I'm wanting to cover, because I know that a lot of the people that I've worked with over the last few years, I would say their attention, they have attention deficit disorder, but not in the classical, or at least in the way that they say with children. But I would say that because they haven't disciplined what their mind is being exposed to, they haven't created this gatekeeper in their mind that allows the good stuff in and keeps the bad shit out. They find that attention can't really, you may find yourself where you really aren't able to keep your attention focused or use your attention for a long period of time without some interfering thought. And for me, it was politics. Politics would have some interfering thought during the moment. And I have to say, 4 or 5 months later, and particularly through the situation I just went through with Dave, I definitely made the right decision. I will not get back involved in any of that. My life is richer. I have so much more attention to give to things that matter to me in my life, and that I do have control over, and I do have rewards that are driven from. So anyways, I appreciate you guys coming into this talk with me, this discourse with me. I apologize for some of the haphazardness. I didn't get to prepare this month like I'd like to, but of course, love to hear your comments, love to hear your any suggestions or questions that you may have. And for those of you who are interested, please private message me. I'm going to be starting a book club, and we'll be going through a few different books that I believe will help contribute to the toolbox that we all need to get through life. So that being said, guys, I most certainly appreciate your time, your attention, everything that I really appreciate being on this journey together. So anyways, you guys have a great day and a great month. See you next month.